goals and recommendations, but also an implementation plan. In other words, a plan on how are we going to implement those recommendations that this group prioritizes. Now, the ATI work group consists of voting members that were appointed by the Board of Supervisors. If you are a voting member, can you raise your hand just to see how many we have? All right, so these are the folks, look at your table, that have voting power in this process. You can lower your hands down. Today, we're not actually going to do voting, but for the rest of the group, when we have been getting together as a group, sometimes we will be voting on some issues, and the folks that raise their hand are either appointed or are standing in for appointed folks. And we will, during today's session, when we have presentations, I will first ask if people that are voting members have any questions, right? And then if you're a member of the public, welcome. But then right after we field the questions and comments from our voting members, then we're going to ask any member of the public if they have any questions or comments, etc. For that, you should also have a public comment card that you picked up at the very front, or should be at your table. Do you see that one? All right, so if you want to speak, just fill that out, and when it comes time to speaking, I'll go over to your table and pick up your public comment card, and then you'll have up to 1 minute to speak. Does that make sense? You don't have to take all 1 minute, of course, but if you do, don't fill in time if you don't need to, right? Is that process clear for members of the public? Yeah? Going once? Going twice? Question?
Does it mean that we only have the opportunity to make one public comment since there's only one of these?
Good question, Patricia. The question is, do we only have the opportunity to give one public comment throughout the day? Because especially you only have one comment card. Maybe if Stephanie can help me, what we'll do is there's more public comment cards in the back. Maybe we'll move them closer to over here. And if you want a second one, you can always pick another one. Or you can borrow it from your other person at the table, especially if they're a voting member and they have a public comment card. Steal it from them. But we're going to have 2 opportunities for public comments. At the very end, we've got 10, 15 minutes for comments on anything. But throughout the day, at key segments of today, we'll also open it up for public comments. So you don't have to wait till the very end either. Okay? All right, with that explanation in mind, let's jump into the objectives for today. The first objective we've already covered. That was Dr. Ross giving us some reflection, some insights into the June 11th session with the Board of Supervisors, the presentation that was given on the interim report. The second objective is to provide you with an overview of the timeline for phase 2, as well as a description of the planning process. This way you can visualize what the process is going to look like over the course of the next 4 or 5 months from here until December. After we cover this item, and at the end of this item, we'll also open it up for any questions of understanding, make sure everybody understands what this process looks like over the next couple months. After this, then we're going to move over to objective number 3, where we're going to spend most of our time today. And objective number 3 is a description of what we have done in terms of groundwork. Some groups have been meeting to try to organize those 140 plus recommendations that are in the interim report. And they're going to describe some of the work that has been done to try to organize that information so that it facilitates the process of prioritizing. You'll get more information on that in a second. And then at the very end of today, we're going to ask the representatives of the Community Engagement Ad Hoc Committee to tell us a little bit about the upcoming activities to engage a broader set of communities and populations around this topic. Okay? Finally, these last 2 are kind of also important. We're going to invite you to sign up for some implementation planning teams, as well as have some time allocated for public comments. Okay? Any questions about the agenda for today? All right. So with that, let's jump into the first topic, and that is the, well, we already covered this one here. Let me go into the timeline and the planning process. And for that, I believe you do have on your slides Not this one, but the next visual. This visual we shared with the group last time. It's a visual of the first phase, which took us through June 5th. On May 23rd, this group got together and endorsed an interim report. And we mentioned to you that from June 5th, or June 11th it was, moving forward, we would enter into the second phase of planning. So the second phase of planning is here, which is what you have on your PowerPoint slides, I believe. Is everyone there? Okay. So the way we could read this is that on the top part, you'll see the months moving chronologically forward, and divided into basically 2-week segments. And up here, it just creates a little theme around what the focus is during that time of the work that we're doing. The most important thing, though, is to look at 12/17. 12/17 is the day that's already been scheduled when we're going to be giving a presentation to the Board of Supervisors. And that's preceded by another presentation to the cluster on 12/11, and that's what we do before it goes to the Board of Supervisors. So that's our basic deadline, and working backwards, what we're looking at is that in order to be ready for the meeting on the 11th, 1 month before, we want to be able to endorse the final report and the implementation plan. The final report, including the implementation plan, have this group endorse it by November 7th. Why a month? Because it takes a month to make sure we get all of the documents finalized, edited, formatted. We learned that in the first stage, right? So we do need that 1 month window to make sure everything is ready to be presented. With that in mind, working backwards, I want us to kind of go over here then. We are proposing for this work group that, this is the meeting today on the 18th, that August 7th, which is our next meeting, that this group endorses a specific set of priority recommendations. So of the 140 plus, we want to be able to narrow it down to the core recommendations. Did I?
Yeah, there's only 114.
Oh, 114. Now there's 100. Okay, 114. Sorry, I have to. Thank you. It just seems so large. Their ego is so big. The right? So it feels like 140. Right? So 114 recommendations. Now, how many recommendations we're going to get to, we don't know. That's the work that we're about to embark on. But the idea is that by the 7th, this group would convene, and the voting members would then make a decision on which recommendations to move forward with. After identifying those core recommendations for the populations that we focused on, those populations are persons with clinical mental health needs and persons with substance use disorders or co-occurring disorders, then we would move forward with implementation planning, right? The how, the funding, all that stuff. Now, one of the things that we said in the first phase of the process is that we were going to focus on these two populations, but beginning in the second phase, we would open up the discussion to more populations. I hope you remember that. It's probably why some of you are still here, right? Because you agreed. Let me push this forward. So what we're going to do is from around right after August 7th, we're going to convene some expert panels to help us identify some key recommendations for 3 other vulnerable justice-involved populations, namely women, LGBT, and gender nonconforming, right? And through these expert panels, we're going to start harvesting and identifying additional recommendations for an expanded set of populations. Through the work of the Community Engagement Ad Hoc Committee, and they're going to describe their activities towards the end of today's session, there will be sessions across different service areas that will solicit recommendations for other populations beyond the 3 that I just mentioned. Is everyone tracking? Okay, so it's kind of like concentric circles. We start off with 2 populations, we're opening it up to 3 other populations, and then through the community engagement work, we're going to broaden and obtain additional recommendations for the others. The idea is that through this process here, by the 15th of by the 15th of October, I'm already fantasizing that I'm in December. By the 15th of October, we want to be able to bring all those recommendations back to this work group, the ATI work group, where this work group will also then, hopefully at that point, endorse additional recommendations for these other populations. Is everyone tracking? Okay. I'm going kind of slow with this so that everyone can kind of feel the flow of the work. So if we get that on the 15th, again, we're trying to complete the implementation planning for as much as we can by the 7th of November. All right. One more thing. In order for us to have the recommendations ready for endorsement on the 7th of August for the 2 populations that we've been working on, we're going to ask the Justice System Reform Ad Hoc Committee and the Community-Based System of Care Ad Hoc Committee to meet together on the 23rd and August 2nd, to meet together to be able to review all of the recommendations and start helping us with the process of prioritization, right? What those recommendations are, we're going to cover in a later segment of today's agenda, aided by Karen and Diana. But we're going to try to get those ready for August 7th. The dates that you see here are dates that the work groups have already identified. And do we have that master calendar available for today? We do? Okay. Patricia, I'm going to borrow this from you. So this document here has the list of all of the work group meetings and locations in case you'd like to attend any of these meetings. One last thing before I end my piece, let me also say that we really thank all of the of you who participated in the first phase, especially the co-chairs for the ad hoc committees that were doing this work. We have had some changes to the ad hoc co-chairs, and let me ask Diana if she can help me introduce the new co-chairs or the continuing co-chairs for those work groups.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you so much to the chairs who have been leading their different committees along the way. We have 3 changes that we wanted to notify you about. The first, Gail Haberman, if you're here, you want to let us know, will be taking over for Dr. Barbara Ferrer on the Community Engagement Committee. Welcome and thank you. Data and Research, Ricardo, are you here? Saw you. Thank you. Ricardo Basurto Davila from the CEO's office will be replacing Dr. Kristen Ochoa on Data and Research. And finally, Herb, you're here. Herb Hatanaka from Special Services for Groups will be replacing Karen Lane on the Funding Committee. So thanks, and if the other chairs are here, if you want to stand real briefly so we can thank you.
Please stand. If you're a co-chair of a work group, please stand up so we can recognize your wonderful work. All right, so at this point, let me see if, first of all, if you're a voting member, let me see if you have any questions about the planning process and the timeline. Voting members, any questions about the voting member? Yes.
Just curious around the funding work group. I know that it's TBD, but will it be monthly? What are the plans around that?
Sure. Can I turn to Mark for the funding work group?
So yeah, it is TBD right now. I think with her coming on board, I mean, we'll be connecting here. We'll start setting up a schedule that try to have some recurring dates here that work for the group, and then we'll also need to sort of be able to try to feed off the work of all the other groups. So I think this will help us to sort of see where we are and where we need to go from here. And we'll be reaching out to the funding work group participants.
And so as soon as those dates are established, then we'll notify through Diana and Karen, anyone who's on our email list of those dates. Any other voting member have a question about the planning process or the timeline? Okay, so members of the public, anyone have a question about the planning process? Okay, over in the back, I've got two folks. Let me walk over there. Make sure you fill out the card. And you can fill it out right after speaking as well. It's right there, okay.
Okay, my question was, I see that you said you're going to slowly implement other groups. So I was wondering about the veteran community, because the suicide rate among veterans is 22 per day. And then, the women, veterans and their children being identified in the different courts, like family court, children's court, and DCSF. Veterans aren't asked, or people aren't asked if they're veterans. Therefore, they're not being referred to veterans help places.
So it's a question for the community engagement groups. I'm going to come back and see, or who would I refer that question to, Dana?
So one of the things, just because we're on a very short time frame, that we are starting to work with the community engagement group to basically think through some of the additional populations that we might not be able to get to as a part of this process, but actually lift those populations up during the community engagement workshops so that the community can let us know what types of solutions, diversion, and alternatives should be employed for these other special populations that we might not be able to get to right now. And hopefully that will help us gather some information and data from the community themselves to then add on to our final report at the next step section.
So would it be fair to say that if there is a population beyond the three that we mentioned that we're about to identify and engage, that if there's a population I'm interested in, I would contact the co-chair for the community engagement ad hoc group, like Dolores or others?
For now, you can move that information
Okay. Okay, got it. And there's another person?
Can you repeat that, Leo?
Yeah. So if there is a person, such as what we just heard, that has an interest around a population that they want to make sure gets covered as we engage, to make sure you give that information to, make sure you put it over in the, we have a flip chart. Yeah, so make sure you put that population over the course of today up here and your name. And maybe your email if you're okay with that, so that we can contact you and we can make sure that that information gets fed over to our community engagement ad hoc committee.
Member Simpson with the Council Connect Coalition. I recognize that this is the first time that I'm here at this meeting, and I know that there have been some processes that have taken place, but I hear, voting members, right? Like, it seems like some individuals have a little more power to make decisions, right, than others. And I'm just wondering, like, and I know that you said some people was appointed and stuff like that. So I just want to sort of, like, I guess, get to know a little bit more about, like, how these people were appointed and, like, how the process took place.
So we can share the motion that was passed on February 12th with you. In that motion, the Board of Supervisors basically said that we had to kind of seek out a representative from particular county departments. So that's about 16 county departments that were designated in that motion. And then each of the board offices were designating 2 community stakeholders that would be added to kind of the ATI voting membership. So that's how we have 26 voting members, so 16 of our county folks from particular departments, and then 10 are 2 representatives from each of the Board of Supervisors offices.
But for the ad hoc committees where we do the work, everybody has equal voice there, and then you develop recommendations that come to the larger body. And so that's what these ad hoc committees are, all these arrows. And so feel free to participate there and have input.
To Bambi's point, oh, sure. My name is Yvette. I'm with Curb and Justice LA. My pronouns are they, them. To Bambi's point and to what you just raised, during the subcommittee process, there wasn't note-taking during those meetings, and so which led to some disparities in the participants' understanding of the decisions that were being made in the space versus what was being communicated. So I'm wondering if moving forward in those work groups, whether minutes will be taken and shared out so that the decisions that are made in the subcommittees are also documented.
Oh, I'm here.
I'm so sorry. I thought it was someone else who said that. I apologize. We do have a charter, right, that we created for the.
So with the help of Department of Public Health, Gail, we actually created these charters for each of the community engagement, for each of the ad hoc committees. And so we started off with the Community Engagement Ad Hoc Committee, and then we shared it with Community-Based System of Care and Justice System Reform. It kind of outlines, what the responsibilities are from the folks that are participating in these committees, what the decision-making structure actually has been, and kind of solidifies that, and then some kind of guiding principles that will help us continue moving forward the work. So that's kind of one tool that we're now sharing with the ad hoc committees. The larger ad hoc committees did have note-taking, but I hear you that the smaller breakout groups didn't necessarily have that. So that's something that we'll take back and try to figure out how we can be better at actually taking notes in those smaller committees. I think at our last joint committee, we had representatives taking notes in each of the smaller groups and kind of shifting that into the ATI Intercept roadmap that we're sharing today. Thank you for bringing that up.
And another comment?
I'm just wondering if, like of those two individuals that were assigned by each district, like how many of those individuals are directly impacted individuals who can actually advocate for the specific needs of those populations? So I'm not sure.
Can I write up those questions and then again we can get back to you individually on that because we covered a lot of that I think at the very beginning when we were doing some foundational work. But we'll
If there's gaps, how would that be addressed?
okay. So let's write down the questions and then we got the question over here. It's being written down. Okay. Thank you. All right. Let me go over here. Yes, again, I appreciate your patience. Again, we're right in the stream of work, and some of those questions are very, very good, and we can also answer them in a different way to make sure that we're all moving together. Again,
Hello, Queen Victoria Ortega. I guess my question is more direct as far as like